Hi and welcome back to the farm. I'm continuing my series of videos on what we can learn from nature and nature's cycles to live the life that we want to live, to kind of move towards our creative projects, towards our desires and towards our goals. And this video is really about some lessons, 7 lessons in fact, from nature that we can learn to overcome the resistance that often comes up when we start a new project and follow that kind of energy of new birth and new beginnings. And this really follows my last video on the nature of resistance. So, starting with lesson 1, this is the lesson of nature itself. And what I mean by that is, for me, the lesson of nature is the lesson of awareness. What is the nature of the resistance we're encountering? Is it a fear? Is it a doubt? Is it insecurity? That awareness is kind of what gives us the ability to think about what is it we need to do next and when do we need to do it, because often the roadblock is just about timing, and that awareness allows us to see the big picture of nature. Lesson number 2 for me is the lesson of the sea. And what I mean by that is, often when we hit resistance, you know, we kind of just we slow down and we grind to a halt. And the lesson of the sea for me is about being relentless. If you think about the sea kind of cracking against the rocks, it kind of just does that, and over a period of days, months, weeks, years, decades, centuries, it carves and wears the rock down just by chipping away a little bit, by being relentless. You know, when you think about anything being born in nature, it has to struggle to get out, and there's kind of this bullheadedness in nature that just keeps going regardless. And that's something that we really need to learn from, because often we get a pushback and we just stop, whereas nature just keeps going, even if it's just in small steps. And that for me is lesson number 3, the lesson of the baby shoots, or of the baby lambs, the baby calves, and that is breaking it down and slowing it down at the beginning. You know, when you think about like a lamb or a calf taking its first few steps, they're very tentative and very small until it starts to strengthen and starts to get more confidence. They're very small steps, and gradually it builds its strength and it can walk. You think about baby shoots, they don't just suddenly push, appear, they kind of have to gradually push through the dirt very slowly until they strengthen and they can move towards the sun. And that for me is the lesson. What is the small step that you can take today? How can you just keep going even if it's one small step? Lesson number 4 for me comes from the tallest of those flowers, the sunflowers. And if you think about sunflowers, they're very tall, they're very flexible, and they have a very large head to kind of take the sun. But the lesson for me from sunflowers is that they're very flexible. They actually move during the day to track the sun and to follow the sun. And they really make the most of what they can get. So they make the most of the sunlight they can get. And that's the lesson for me. To stay flexible, to accept where we are, and to make the most of what we're given. To make the most of the hand we're dealt, if you like. There's that old saying, isn't there? When we're given lemons, make lemonade, or make hay while the sun shines. It's about staying flexible and being able to wring the most out of what you've got. If that doesn't work, then for me, lesson number 5 is the lesson of the redwoods. Those kind of huge, majestic trees in California. And they're actually my favourite trees. So a big lesson I learned about them when I lived in California is that every redwood in the forest is connected by a root system. And you often see fairy rings, which is one big tree with lots of small trees kind of sprouting off of it, getting support from it. And that for me is the lesson of the redwoods. Get support. Sometimes we need to just spend some time with people who love us, our friends, our loved ones, people who believe in us, people who can see the best in us even when we can't. And so that for me is the lesson of those huge trees that are so ancient. Support. Get support, and also give support. Because often if you give support, that takes your mind off of your own resistance. Lesson number 6 is the lesson of the butterfly. And for me, this lesson is about realizing and staying aware of the fact that resistance does actually serve a purpose. Often the problem with resistance is that we resist it. Sounds a little bit strange, I know, but what we resist persists and grows stronger. So therefore, if you think about the butterfly, it has to force its way out of the chrysalis, it has to break its way out. And by going through that resistance, it strengthens itself. It goes through the process it needs to survive. If you were actually to help a butterfly out of the chrysalis, its wings wouldn't dry, it wouldn't be strong enough to actually spread its wings to allow them to dry, and it would actually die. So it's going through that process of resistance that actually strengthens it. When you think about it, whenever we go through resistance, we grow. We get stronger, we become more self-assured, and it actually feeds our spirit. It actually helps us grow our core self. And we become much more of our core self, and we follow the call of our soul much more easily. And that is an exponential thing. Lesson number 7 for me is the lesson of water. And that lesson is that water always takes the path of least resistance to ground. So the question for you is, what is the path of least resistance towards your goal, towards your desire, towards your end goal, as it were? And that's not necessarily the same as the easiest way, because easy doesn't necessarily mean the best way. There's always a path of least resistance that brings up the least fear, doubt and insecurity in us, that often is the way to go. Sometimes we need to change tack after a while, you know, the lesson of the sunflower, stay flexible. But what is the path of the least resistance? And then last but not least, the bonus lesson for me is the lesson of the mountain, which is sometimes when I'm on a path and there's a huge great mountain in front of me, sometimes that's a signal to kind of go over the mountain. But sometimes if that mountain of resistance persists, even despite all the other things I've done, then sometimes for me that's a clue to take a different route. Sometimes that's a clue for me that maybe I'm on the wrong path. Doesn't mean to say that the end goal is wrong, but maybe there's a different way of getting there. So that for me is a case of thinking, what is the best way towards this, and do I need to take another route? So hopefully those are some lessons from nature that will help you. The question I have is, what lessons have you learned from nature to overcome your resistance? What has nature told you about how to move towards what it is that you want to create? And last but not least, what does your own nature tell you about how to move forward? How can you be in alignment with who you really are, your true nature, your essential nature, in order to move forward? Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.